Hello and welcome to Wales Online's Hustings Debate. My name is Will Hayward and I'm the Welsh Affairs Editor at Wales Online. We are very lucky today to be joined by three of Wales's most well-known politicians, Conservative David T.C. Davies, the Secretary of State for Wales, Labour's Joe Stevens, the Shadow Secretary of State for Wales, and Liz Saville-Roberts, who is Plaid Cymru's leader in Westminster. Thank you very much for joining us, all three of you. So we're going to be doing this remotely, COVID style, if you will, which has made it easier to get people together in a very busy campaign. And this debate will be going on until 8 p.m. We've asked our readers for questions that they'd like us to put to the assembled politicians, and there was a huge response. So we've tried to collate them together and ask the questions which were asked most when we asked. So I'll be putting the questions to our candidates. They are welcome to respond to each other in the spirit of a healthy debate, but because we need to maintain some structure, we'll be giving them a couple of minutes each to answer each question. Now, this is a really interesting debate because while the Conservatives have been in power for a decade and a half in Westminster, Labour have run many of the services in Wales since 1999. On top of this, Wales is really reliant on whoever sits in Westminster for much of its funding. And this can make discussions of responsibility and accountability in Wales complex. And that's why we think it's really vital that we have debates like this to help people make informed choices ahead of the election. So first off, each candidate is going to speak for 1 minute. They're going to have their 1 minute initial pitch, if you like. And this order was decided at random. So first off, we'll have David T.C. Davies from the Conservatives. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Will. I hope you can hear me okay. Good. I'm assuming you can. Anyway, this government, as you know, was elected 5 years ago on the basis that we needed to get Brexit completed. We achieved that, but we were then immediately assailed with a series of crises, the like of which I certainly have known in the 25 years I've been in politics. Obviously, the global pandemic, followed by the war in Ukraine, the impact that had on inflation and energy prices, and the further instability caused by the situation in the Middle East. Now, I'd be the first to accept, especially with hindsight, the government made mistakes and could have done things differently. And I'm happy to go into that further. But what I want to say is that we now have a situation where inflation is down to 2%, unemployment is at 3%. We have the joint fastest economic growth within the G7. Anyone who wants to change that is going to put all of those things at risk. And that's why it's not change that we need. We need continuity. And we also need to hold the Welsh Government to account for their failings in public services.
Okay, thank you very much. Liz Saville-Roberts.
Thanks, Will. Change is coming. Everyone knows that the Tories are on their way out and that Labour will form the next government. The question is then, what sort of change do we want here in Wales? The past 14 years of disastrous Tory rule have been devastating, but for too long, Labour has won Welsh votes during elections only to cast Wales's interests aside the moment they take their seats in Westminster. So electing Plaid Cymru MPs will keep Labour in check in Wales, ensuring that the interests of our communities always come first. And we're offering as Plaid Cymru a real alternative to the increasingly lockstep policies of the two main UK parties. Proposals to support communities right across Wales with the high cost of living and to properly fund our public services like the NHS. This is not as good as it gets for Wales. Tonight, I'm looking forward to making the case as to why a vote for Plaid Cymru is a vote for Wales's voice in Westminster, not Westminster's voice in Wales. A vote for Plaid Cymru on the 4th of July is a vote for fairness, for ambition, and for Wales. Diolch yn fawr.
Diolch yn fawr, Liz. Joe Stevens.
Thanks, Will, and hello to everyone watching at home. Thank you for joining the hustings tonight. This is an election about change, and on the 4th of July, you get to have your say and give your judgment on the past 14 years of chaos, division and failure of successive Conservative governments. If you want to see our economy finally grow so that jobs and wealth can be created in every community for every community, if you want to see energy bills lowered for good, if you want an NHS fit for the future and opportunities for your children, if you want safe streets and secure borders, then our changed Labour Party is proudly for you. The road to a Labour government in Westminster runs right through Wales, but change only comes if you vote for it. The chance to have two Labour governments working in partnership for the benefit of everyone across Wales. And I really hope you'll join us in this national endeavour and we can then get started. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joe. Thank you, all three of you. So an issue which has come up time and again in those questions was the issue of trust, about whether we can trust politicians. So Wales's First Minister has refused to step down despite losing a no confidence vote in the Senedd. At Westminster, Conservative politicians have been found to have made bets on the general election. How can we trust you and your parties? Go first to David T.C. Davis. Should Craig Williams be suspended from your party?
Well, I'm certainly not going to defend what Craig Williams admits he's done. And I want to say straight away, I've not made any bets on the election, nor would I. I don't think it would be appropriate. In fact, I haven't made any bets on anything, as far as I can recall, for actually many years. So I cannot endorse that behaviour at all. I want to be very clear about it. From my own personal point of view, I believe that we have a duty to set very high standards in public office. That's why the first thing I did in coming in as Secretary of State for Wales was to get rid of the ministerial car, which I thought was a waste of taxpayers' money, frankly. I use my own car, I use public transport, and I travel economy class on it, and always have done. And I have to use a taxi occasionally when there's no public transport available, but there's no ministerial car. The second thing I did was to get rid of all of the alcohol in the building. I said I want no alcohol in the Wales office building. I want no alcohol drunk in here under any circumstances. We will not have functions where there is alcohol served, and I will obviously not drink at any official function that I have, which is outside of the Wales office, because I acknowledge that there were issues over use of alcohol in the early part of the 2020s. So those are the standards that I set, and I think other people should follow them. So I acknowledge the problems within the Conservative Party, and clearly I think that people in the Labour Party should acknowledge the concerns over Vaughan Gethin's donations.
Well, we'll go on to Joe Stevens then. I mean, Vaughan Gethin has lost a vote in the Welsh Parliament. That is the democratically elected body of the people of Wales. Do you think it's right that he remains in post, and how can people trust Labour if this is how they reacted to that?
Well, the vote in the Senedd was a non-binding vote, and it's open to the Conservatives and Plaid Cymru, who both worked together on the non-binding vote, to bring a formal vote of no confidence. And if they really think that they don't want Vaughan Gethin leading the Welsh Government, then they should do that. Vaughan has broken no rules. And in fact, the Tory leader in the Senedd, Andrew R.T. Davies, has said on the floor of the Senedd that Vaughan has broken no rules. Turning to the wider issue of trust in politics, I mean, I think it won't come as a surprise to any of us and anybody watching this that we have seen trust in politics decline, certainly since I was elected in 2015. And mistrust leads to disengagement, and disengagement leads to apathy. And certainly I've seen on doorsteps across Wales, in the patches that I've been campaigning in, people saying that they don't feel that voting makes any difference. And what I would say to them is, please do vote, because this is your opportunity to turn things around by electing a Labour government in Westminster. We are putting cleaning up politics and ending the crisis of confidence in politicians as a centrepiece in our manifesto. We're going to create a new independent ethics and integrity commission so we can turn the page on what's been going on for the last 14 years. And there will be robust processes and robust consequences if we form a government for any minister who breaks the rules. So we won't see that situation where there are breaches of the ministerial code, but the Prime Minister, the Conservative Prime Minister, takes no steps. Keir Starmer is very clear that he will provide the leadership to make our politics a force for good once again, because we've changed from a party of protest to one that always puts the interests of the country first. So it's always country first, party second. Okay, Joe.
We had a lot of questions on this, so I am just going to come back in. You've said that this was a Plaid Cymru Conservative move, but we've had a lot of messages from people expressing their concerns about this. Why do you think that ordinary people in Wales are concerned about what's happened with Vaughan Gethin? Given, as you say, he's broken no rules, why do you think they are worried about this?
Well, what I would say is I've not had it raised with me very often in constituencies across Wales where I've been campaigning. I'm not saying it hasn't come up at all, but it hasn't come up very often. And in fact, I had a conversation yesterday with somebody locally who just said to me, you know, I just want some honesty from governing parties. And he was talking about the Conservative government here, you know, so you get Rishi Sunak telling people that things have turned a corner, you know, things are getting better. This is not what people feel, and it's taking the public for mugs, and they can see through this. They want some honesty about the situation. And I think that if we had some more honesty from the government that we've had over the last 14 years about how bad the situation was and what they were going to do about it, then people would feel a bit more trusting.
Okay, I'm going to come to Liz Roberts in a second, but David, did you want to come back on that?
I did, because to me, if you want to solve a problem, you've got to acknowledge that you've got a problem. And that means that in this area, it's no good saying, well, it's nothing to do with us. Nobody's worried about our people. It's all the other side. You've got to be acknowledging the fact that your side have made errors. That's why I spent most of my answer dealing with the issue of alcohol, being drunk during COVID, which is totally wrong, and the issue of bets, which are totally wrong. Now, I don't know whether any rules have been broken or laws have been broken or not. There's an investigation going on, and I'm not going to preempt that. So I don't know. So at this moment, nobody has been found to have broken any rules. But that's not the point. The point is, it looks wrong. It is wrong, and I'm calling it out. And only by calling out your own side can you really acknowledge that you've got a problem. Otherwise, you're just playing political games. So Joe needs to acknowledge Vaughan Gething may not have broken any rules. Nobody suggested he has. The issue is, was that good judgment to take £200,000 from somebody twice convicted of dumping waste, whose company had received a £400,000 donation from a taxpayer? That's the issue here. It's not an issue of rules, it's an issue of judgment.
Is it good judgment for Rishi Sunak not to suspend Craig Williams as a candidate in this election when he has himself admitted a gross error of judgment? So there's a lack of leadership, there's weakness, an inability to hold his own candidate.
Well, I think that issue needs to be looked at. I mean, I'm being quite clear with you. It's unacceptable behaviour. I'm being very, very clear about that. It shows a total lack of judgment, and it's totally unacceptable.
Okay.
I can't, I'm
condemning my own. We're going to just move on to Liz Roberts now.
Thank you.
Obviously, Plaid Cymru's had its own issues. It was only a year ago that your leader stepped down after it was found that the policy had failed to have a zero tolerance to sexual harassment. So why can people trust Plaid Cymru?
Well, I deeply regret that time and that it happened, but also my party took on the challenge of what happened there with Project Pawb, which we have brought the vast majority of its recommendations to fruition. And of course, and this is critical, the leader of the time, Adam Price, stood down because of this. He took responsibility for it. I think this matters because we're at a time now, out and about there, the trust in politics is at an all-time low. People use words like politicians as though somehow that's a dirty word. Now, take a step back. That's frightening because democracy depends on having elected representatives there in whom the public have a degree of faith. And that question now about whether you can be seen to be bought or not bought and what the implications of that is really, really important. So we've seen it, I hear what David is saying about his own standards and I respect those. But the question for the Conservative Party is, this is cumulative. People have heard the stories of parties during the COVID time. They've heard about the VIP lanes and PPE, protective equipment, and Tory donors giving money to the party and then getting these $1 million contracts. We've heard about the £15 million donation from David Hester, who made racist comments about a member of Parliament, Diane Abbott. And then we also hear about Vaughan Gething. Now, the concerns about environmental issues in Wales and whether the Labour Welsh Government can manage environmental issues effectively really matters. We've been talking about PCBs only today, but the implication that there is a company which has behaved criminally, will be coming back again to the court in December this year, I believe, that they have been able to buy an advantage. The implication of that demeans our politics, and the sad thing is to see it demeaning our politics here in Wales. Now, I know probably that Jo...
what I was going to say there is that you've made an allegation there, which is
as a gimmick.
We'll come to you after, Jo. Just want Liz finish. Just wrap up very quickly, please. That's been a couple of minutes.
You described as a gimmick something that Labour was very happy to bring forward in Scotland. Now, judgment and the good name of our politics in Wales matters. And I really think people are raising it possibly more often than you're prepared to mention. But this idea of the implication of corruption and also the fact that Natural Resources Wales has been just silenced during the purdah period before the general election. We want to see that our communities are looked after properly. And I'm sorry, but it just isn't good enough to try and dismiss it while the general election is going on and perhaps hope that you can just brush it under the carpet afterwards.
Joe, do you want to come back on that quickly?
I just want to come back because Liz has made a number of unsubstantiated allegations there, which I think when you listen back to this, Liz, I would be very wary about repeating those. And this is nothing about brushing things under the carpet. You've heard what Vaughan Gething has said. He's answered many, many questions on it. And he has answered all the questions that have been put to him. But essentially, what we're talking about here is someone who won a leadership campaign within the rules. And if people don't like the rules, then, we can change them. And in fact, he's instigated a review of those rules within Welsh Labour. So I think he's expressed contrition and understands those people that do feel strongly about this. He's accepting that.
Okay, I appreciate all of you have got more to come back on this. We're actually getting on to a third of the way through, and I don't just want to talk about this. I think 10 questions might have been very ambitious. I'm just going to move on to the next one. I'm sorry, Liz.
To Joe, did Vaughan Gething show good judgment?
Vaughan Gething followed the rules. He didn't break any rules, and what we've seen throughout the last 14 years are breaking of rules by the Conservative government. And, don't cast aspersions when your own party has been in such difficult circumstances.
Okay, we're going to move on to another question now regarding high-speed rail. So England, Scotland and Northern Ireland are all benefiting from a once-in-a-generation, multi-billion-pound investment in rail infrastructure as a consequence of HS2. Because HS2 was defined as an England and Wales project, Wales won't be getting any of that money as a consequential. My question to you is, what are you going to do about this? First, we'll go to Liz Saville-Roberts.
Well, this is something that people really are aware of. It has cut through this understanding that this, and HS2, by the way, Joe, it does exist. It does still exist. And it only exists in England. And in fact, now that the section on crew has been removed, it doesn't even benefit North Wales. And it never benefited the South Wales economy. It was always going to be a risk on the South Wales economy. And imagine what we could do if it actually was recognised that the consequential here came to Wales as it goes to Scotland, as it goes to Northern Ireland, the difference it could make, what we could do with £4 billion for our transport needs here, things we could do with buses, the things we could do with our own improved train services, things we could actually start looking at alternative ways of making public transport, which particularly in rural Wales, actually is it's a question of whether you can get to work or not. And in many cases, it isn't. Now, this has been asked for, this has been requested by Welsh Labour Senedd members, alongside, of course, Plaid Cymru. This has been voted on and called for. This could make so much difference. Why, Joe, are you looking to refuse this money for Wales, the poorest nation in the United Kingdom, the only nation that Labour actually manages and have been in majority here for 25 years, a quarter of a century? Why can you not acknowledge that better public funding would result in better services for us in the communities which we represent?
Okay, David C.C. Davis, how you've defended this decision a lot in the past. How is it justifiable that this can be an England and Wales project when there is clearly precedent with Crossrail and the Elizabeth line for Wales to get a consequential of that money?
Well, I think most rail infrastructure is seen as England and Wales because many passengers are travelling between the two countries. I'll come on to the figures in a minute, but if you take one of the last major rail infrastructure projects that's been beneficial to both Wales and people in England, southern England anyway, was the electrification of the Great Western Line. That's obviously benefited anyone who's travelling between London and Cardiff or even beyond. So that is an infrastructure project which took place mainly in England, but the benefits were enjoyed by everyone. There are projects going on at the moment. There's a much smaller one going on in the Forest of Dean at the moment. That's about shoring up a cliff. But basically, it's a project that's taking place entirely in England, and it's going to benefit passengers travelling between Wales and the Midlands.
Sorry,
and
David, can I just interrupt you?
Let me go with the figures. Let me go with the figures. Yeah, okay. The figures. Wales has had £390 billion worth of rail infrastructure spending in the last control period. The South Wales Metro has cost well over £500 million, and that is a joint UK-Welsh government-funded project. So that's a lot of money that's gone in as well. And the North Wales coastline will be worth £1 billion. And I'm told that Mark Garver's already been in discussions about Network Rail about taking that forward. So I don't accept that Wales hasn't had.
I do want to pull you up, David, on this issue of Welsh people can use it when they go to England. If you were to invest in a hospital in Norwich, a Welsh person who breaks their leg in Norwich would be able to use that hospital, but there would still be a Barnet consequential there, wouldn't there? It's just a matter of fairness, this, surely. As the advocate for Wales in Cabinet, do you not want this money to come to Wales?
Well, I want to bring as much money into Wales as we can possibly get, and there has been a lot of money that's come in. I mean, the Cardiff Crossrail project was a levelling up fund one, which came outside of Barnet consequentials, as did, by the way, the South Wales Metro. I mean, there was no Barnet consequential for that. That was just money that went into building what is essentially a rail infrastructure project, and that's on top of the 390 billion. So. I can see where the argument comes from, but I think that Wales has done pretty well out of rail infrastructure spending. And there's no guarantee, of course, if it was devolved, that any extra money going into Wales would go into rail infrastructure spending. And in fact, what we've seen over the last few years is that when the government have made money available to the Welsh government for example, childcare provision, that money hasn't been passed on.
Okay, Joe Stevens, if Labour do win the general election, will you be advocating for Keir Starmer to be giving Wales its fair share of HS2 funding?
Well, first off, let's talk about the figures, because the question is, why is Wales missing out on billions being spent? The Welsh Government estimates that the figure, if there was reclassification, is around £350 million. So the billions figure previously reported is incorrect. What we do know is that Rishi Sunak has bust the whole project and the budget, and there'll be no more HS2 built. So he's now applying a scorched earth policy where all that land that was compulsorily purchased is being sold off. Now, if we form the next government, we will have no certainty on the existing costs that would be inherited, meaning that we can't make commitments now to reclassifying HS2. We've already launched an independent expert review so we can learn the lessons from this Tory shambles of a project. And that review is also looking at how we can deliver transport infrastructure faster and more effectively so that communities across the country can see the benefits. And we are going to deliver ambitious rail reform for Wales through Great British Railways. That will be a unified, publicly owned new body running the railways in the public interest. And for Wales, that means the ability to agree cross-border and regional rail services with Great British Railway for the first time. And we'll have Welsh rail enhancements in a pipeline agreed with Welsh Government so that we can build on the work underway by Transport for Wales to bring track and train together in Wales. And Welsh Government, finally, will have a statutory role in governing, managing, planning and developing the rail network in Wales. That's in complete contrast to what we've seen, where the South Wales electrification of the main line stopped in Cardiff and nothing has happened to the promised North Wales electrification. We don't know where the money is. It's a promise that's not been delivered. Add that to a huge list of promises from the Conservative government.
I'm gonna because this is about infrastructure, and a message I've had from quite a lot of people is around. I want to do this really quickly. We'll just whiz around each of you on a third bridge over the Menai Strait. So very quickly, to each of you, would you commit to building a third bridge? We'll go to Liz Saville-Roberts. I couldn't actually see that in Plaid's manifesto, although it was indicated, but that was one of your leaders' priorities previously.
Yes.
That is a commitment that you would want to build a third Menai Strait.
There's no point in me talking more than that. It's desperately needed. If you travel there, if any of the bridges ever go down, and the old bridge did go down for a while, they were conservative over that, we desperately need another bridge for safety there and to make sure we actually take some of the pressure off the bridges as they stand.
Okay. David?
Yes.
Okay. Joe?
I'm not going to make an unfunded spending commitment on a hustings online tonight. Let's see what the books look like if and when we're successful in the general election, which I hope we will be.
Okay. Would you... David?
Well, I mean, leaving aside the unfundedness of it, I mean, surely
well,
the problem here is
hang on.
No. Surely the problem here is the Welsh Labour government will not commit to any new road projects.
Well, that's wrong, isn't it? Because roads are being built in Wales at this very moment.
Well, yes, in Labour voting areas.
Well, it's interesting. As we bring up road building, I think we can move on to our next question, which is about climate change, and this is quite pertinent. So, realistically, speaking to experts, none of the parties' manifestos really come close to doing what we need to fix the planet. Climate change is acknowledged as one of the biggest problems facing not just Wales, not just the UK, but humanity. Given that none of your manifestos seem to go far enough, why can we trust you to address this problem? We'll go first to Joe Stevens. Labour rolled back on a pledge to make a 28 billion per year of additional capital expenditure available to meet net zero targets. Are you satisfied that the current Labour manifesto will get us to where we need to be in terms of net zero?
We've set ourselves really challenging targets in the manifesto, so clean electricity by 2030. And actually, what our proposals do are set out an ambitious long-term plan to reform and change the way that we run the country so that we can reach that net zero by 2030. So things around, for example, it will benefit Wales hugely. Planning reform on critical infrastructure projects so that we can deliver new nuclear, we can deliver quadruple offshore wind, which we have a great opportunity in the Celtic Sea to do. A modern industrial strategy so that we are matching up industries across Wales. I'm thinking of things like steel, automotive, advanced manufacturing, and that offshore wind, and a national wealth fund to the investment vehicle to do that. But most importantly, Great British Energy. So a publicly owned Great British Energy company. That means that we will get bills down, energy bills down for good. We will have energy security for Wales and for Britain, and we won't be reliant on gas, fossil fuels from Putin in another situation in the future.
So that goes far enough, does it, to reach net zero, the plan in that manifesto?
Well, certainly for 2030 clean electricity, that's what we aim to do. That's what we plan to do. And we have the most ambitious plan out of any of the major parties involved in this election. Okay.
David C.C. Davis, are your party going far enough? You recently gave out a lot of North Sea oil drilling rights. Is that the way towards net zero?
Yes. Well, yes, we should, and we did. And Joe's plan is going to fall here straight away. I mean, for a start, Joe said that we're getting gas from Russia. We're not. We're getting a lot of the gas that we need on our grid from the North Sea, and that will stop if Labour stop all the drilling rights. And the LNG that comes in to top up what we require comes mainly from Qatar and the United States, a few other countries as well. But we're that is where the gas is coming from. Now, if the Labour Party shut down, an incoming Labour government shut down the oil and gas in the North Sea, which is what they said they're going to do, that's going to cause us major difficulties, because the problem is if we become more dependent on wind and solar power, we actually still need gas to back it up when the sun isn't shining and the wind isn't blowing. And the advantage of gas is you can turn up you can increase and decrease the amount of electricity going onto the grid very, very quickly with gas generated electricity. You can't do it so easily with stuff like nuclear, for example, which is only good for baseload. So there's a real hole in their plan here. They're not going to be able to. They're certainly not going to be able to cut bills. And the danger is that their plan will actually lead to electricity blackouts, because we won't have the gas that we need. We're going to need to have a certain amount of gas right up until, well, even beyond 2050, and most experts accept that. So I don't think the plan is going to work, and I certainly don't see how shutting down our own supplies of oil and gas is going to make us less dependent on other countries. In fact, it's going to have the opposite effect.
We're not planning to shut down oil and gas supplies, David.
I'd like to just put this, David. You've said a lot how Labour's won't work. How will yours work to reach net zero?
Well, first of all, we've put in place legislation whereby we have to follow the Climate Change Committee's carbon budgets. Ministers have a legal responsibility to do that, and they will be setting us targets to reach net zero by 2050. So we have to do that legally. But stepping back a bit, let's remember this, that we generate about 1% of the world's carbon dioxide emissions. So even if we followed some sort of very extreme version of carbon reduction, such as being what has been proposed by Just Stop Oil or something, we stopped all fossil fuels tomorrow. We went to net zero by next year. I mean, impossible to do, by the way, and it would be a very bad idea. But let's just say we did. It would have virtually no effect at all on climate change. What will impact climate change is if we can demonstrate, if Western countries, world wealthy countries like the UK can demonstrate that it's possible to achieve net zero without any impact on living standards, then we can see countries like China and India, which are generating significant amounts of CO2, and the United States, by the way, following us. But this idea that we can just do it and everyone else will follow is naive at best. India is not going to follow us and become net zero just because we've done it. They will want to see that they can do it without damaging the living standards of the 1.6 billion people who live there, and China the same. So we have to set the example in the right way, and that's why we have to take a steady approach rather than doing something that's extreme.
Okay, well, I should make the point that a lot of our emissions are historic emissions. We became a very wealthy country on the back of those emissions, and a lot of the production in those countries that produce emissions is to produce products that we then buy. But I want to just move on to Liz Saville-Roberts. Your party's opposed plans in the Senate to well, you've kicked into the long grass potentially, plans to tackle agricultural pollution and have more tree planting in Wales. Is Plaid Cymru serious about tackling climate change?
We're very much aware that this is an issue for very, very many, particularly young people. And there's a wider question here. There's the question of nature diversity alongside living standards and the sort of energy that we produce. And if we look at agriculture, of course, when it comes to the simplistic approach, which could be 10% on every farm holding, well, is that the best use of land, where at the same time we also know food security? And there are other ways also of sequestering carbon. I mean, I work here in upland Wales, and we have really consequential, really important is peat land maintenance. And you have to do this in a sophisticated way. You can't just say that every one size model will fit everywhere. And that has to be done hand in hand alongside with farmers, just as much as it is with statements from Welsh Government, which tend to be antagonistic, frankly, and some of the people that we need to bring with us in order to bring this forward effectively. But the interesting point that we had there from David about maintaining our lifestyles. Now, when it comes to gas, we know that the gas has been given license on the North Sea. That will follow the highest bidder. We don't even have a means of storing gas in the UK anymore. That may not have any difference to prices here. That may well just go straight off to the continental Europe if that's where the best bidder is. And I think that one of our critical roles for us in Western Europe, is that we are playing our role in the global challenge, of course, of moving towards low carbon energy. And that will happen through the development of technologies and how then we can help others in doing that. Now, I'm completely agnostic, and my party's policy when it comes to nuclear is to support developments at Wilver and at Trawsfynydd. We have so much potential for other forms of renewable energy that can be balanced by nuclear, that can be balanced by hydrogeneration, but particularly pumped hydrogeneration. But the critical thing, and we came back to the point, Will, that you made there, that Wales has suffered from the previous industries that extracted from our natural resources. And I fear that this will happen again with energy, that we will be used as a place for generating energy, but it will make little advantage for our communities. Now, of course, again, my party, Plaid Cymru, alongside Welsh Labour MSs, has been arguing for the devolution of the Crown Estate, which of course has already happened to Scotland. That gives us advantages for procurement and actually making some of the wealth staying here in Wales. And the final point that I think is really important when it comes to looking at energy, cost of energy, and quality of people's lives. We know that we pay in North Wales the highest standing charges, and yet we have some of the oldest housing in existence in the United Kingdom. What are we going to do to bring the price of energy down for people in their homes? That is something that I don't hear from Labour talk about JBE, but it won't be generating anything. I want to see a mechanism that brings the cost of electricity down for people, because it will make a real difference to the cost of living.
Thanks, Liz. I know you want to come back, David, but I want to ask you about Tartar, if I may. And sorry, I see you want to come back as well. I just want to get through as many questions as we can. With the impending losses of thousands of highly paid steel jobs in Tartar and the supply chain, is Wales on the cusp of a repeat of what we saw with the failure to support Valley's communities through the end of mining? If I can go to you first, David, do you feel like you've got a good deal for workers at Tartar?
Well, we got the only deal that there was, because what Tartar were originally planning to do was to pull out completely of making steel in Wales. That would have cost 8,000 jobs. And as you rightly say, it would have cost many thousands more in the supply chain. We estimated at the time around 12,500. It could have been more than that. So that would have been 20,000, well, nearly 20,000 jobs, just over. So what we then did was to spend some time talking to them about what we could do to keep them in Wales, and that's where the idea of the arc furnace came from. It was their suggestion. They were very clear they weren't going to stay in Wales with blast furnaces that were losing £1.5 million every day. That if they kept one of those furnaces open, the losses would still have been almost as substantial, because the coke ovens had to go and the sintering plant had to go, which means all of that had to be imported from elsewhere. So they're absolutely clear about this. It was the only deal on the table. And by going ahead with that investment of £500 million, which is UK government investment, nothing came from Welsh government here, we will have saved 5,000 jobs in the industry and more in the supply chain. And we will have made sure that steel continues to be made in South Wales. Funnily enough, it will also, of course, be a lot greener, because it will be steel without the CO2 emissions. I mean, the CO2 emissions from Port Talbot were a significant proportion of the UK total. I think, though please don't take this as gospel, I think it was around 1 to 1.5%, but we can check that figure afterwards. So really, anyone who's environmental ought to be pleased about it. But then that still leaves us with a problem of 2,800 job losses. That's really a really terrible, significant thing. It's better than 8,000 job losses, but it's still terrible. So that's why we came up with the idea of a transition fund, which we put £80 million towards to support those people in that wider community. And I've worked with the trade unions, with Nice Port Talbot Council, invited other councils on, with Labour MPs and Senate member, to try and make sure that support is put firmly in place.
Okay, Joe Stevens, your party said you support the plan of the unions, which is to keep a blast furnace going. I think it's blast furnace 4, while the construction of the arc furnace goes on. Now, the companies say this just isn't safe, and if we were to do it, it would extend the length of time. It could result in more job losses. I've been to Port Talbot and seen where they plan doing it. Is it credible to say that you can build an arc furnace at the same time as a blast furnace operating?
I think it is, and I've been to Port Talbot many times. I've met with the management several times. I've met with the workforce regularly and with their trade unions. But let's just look at why we're in this situation. We've had, in the last 14 years, we've had no industrial strategy. The government has failed to maximise the use of Welsh and UK steel in the pitiful number of infrastructure projects that they've undertaken. There's been a lack of action and delay on energy costs for energy-intensive industries like steel. And as a result, they're really disadvantaged against other steel-producing countries. Conservatives have been too slow on net zero. As Liz mentioned earlier, they cancelled carbon capture storage. I could go on with this list. So that's why we're in this situation. And we have said Tata shouldn't make irreversible decisions before the 4th of July. We want to avoid that cliff edge of those 2,800 jobs going in the space of, probably a year. And we want them to work with the unions to secure a smooth transition to clean steel. And that's why we have committed £3 billion, including the 500 million that David has mentioned that is currently there, to make sure that transition is done smoothly, because we are going to need more steel, not less. Our industrial strategy on renewables, on floating offshore wind, on house building, on new towns, we will be relying, if those furnaces both close, on imports. And the imports will mean steel coming in, creating greater emissions. So finally, on the transition board, which David chairs, that is sitting on £100 million, none of which has made it out of the door to help support workers and communities affected, who potentially they're losing their jobs in the next few weeks.
Joe, the company has indicated that this is happening. This is what they are going to do. They are going ahead with this. I know you've called on them to not make any irreversible changes, but they are. Are they posturing here? Is that what you think?
Well, I met with them a couple of weeks ago at Port Talbot. We are continuing our conversations. We are going to talk again. If we are lucky enough to form a UK government after July the 4th, one of the first things that we will do is be getting back to meet with Tata, because there is a role, as I've said, for steel, for Welsh steel in the future. We want the skills and talent of Welsh steel workers to be maximised in delivering the huge amounts of steel, much more steel than we're using now, that we will need if we're going to deliver on our industrial strategy. And I want Tata workers to be part of that.
Liz Savile-Roberts, your party is says it wants to nationalise steel. How much will that cost?
Well, the question is, what is the cost if we don't, frankly?
I want to know what the cost is, how much it would cost to do it.
Yeah. If as things stand, we will have no security of supply. We will be outsourcing all the green goals that we would otherwise be able to make ourselves. And this is all what just transition is about, frankly, that we need to be able to keep this supply going. Nationalisation looks to be the only way of doing it. That would obviously be something that have to be negotiated with the company itself. But as it stands, the company held all the aces. Vaughan Gething went on a performative visit to show that he was going to see them, and he came back with nothing whatsoever. We need, if we're going to move forward with offshore wind, with the infrastructure projects which we so desperately need, we need to have the means in the here and now to be able to produce primary steel, virgin steel. We don't have it in any other place. Then technology, I hope, will move ahead. But this is actually what the just transition looks like, alongside, of course, the effect this would have on the community of Port Talbot and the supply chains that already operate with this company. This would be disastrous on so many levels. And if we cannot think radically about this here, then I think, in all honesty, what we've got with Labour is just talking about things which they're never actually going to be able to achieve.
Okay, if we're going to talk radically, then have you done any costings on how much it would be to nationalise? Because Tata paid in 2007 $6 billion. They've spent another $5 billion on it. What would you spend to nationalise this?
This would obviously have to be negotiated with the company, but the costs that we will face otherwise. And I also, for my party here, what we are doing is proposing something which it looks to me the other parties are not proposing, because they don't want to go in the radical directions which we're going to actually have to face if we're going to bring about real change.
Okay, I'm going to see if I can get more answers on money more broadly of all you. Sorry, Joe, I just want to go on to a few more. We've got about 15 minutes left. So infrastructure and public services in Wales are in desperate need of investment. Anyone living in Wales will be able to tell you that. How much extra money will the Welsh Government get to address this if your party comes to power? Go to Joe Stevens first. How much more money will Wales have over the next 5 years under Labour if they win a majority?
Well, first of all, we've got to win an election. We've then got to look at what the economic inheritance will look like. And we know that it's likely whoever wins the election will have the worst economic inheritance in 70 years. But we have put at the heart of our manifesto bringing economic stability, creating economic growth, and kick-starting wealth creation in every community for every community. And that will consist of three things. And if we can do that, then we will be able to deliver more funding right across the country to Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. So first of all, stability, taxation, mortgage interest rates and inflation need to be kept as low as possible with tough fiscal rules. Investment, so investment in Welsh businesses and the creation of jobs in the industries of the future, especially things like renewable energy and clean steel that we've talked about. And just on the point that Liz was saying about the Crown Estate, you know, developers, and I've talked to many developers, they want certainty. They want certainty so that they can get out there and build floating offshore wind. We are in a race for this. You know, Labour is on the starting line. The Tories are still in the changing room, and Plaid would still be in the office drawing diagrams, arguing about who's going to be in charge of it. We need to get on with it. And that is the only way that we grow the economy. And by growing the economy, we create the revenue to invest in public services in Wales.
Okay, I just want to come back to that because you mentioned your costed manifesto, and I looked through it, and it seemed to suggest there would be a Barnett consequential of 200 million to Wales. Now, that's 2% of the Welsh NHS budget. That's just about inflation rate. That's just maintaining what we already have. Is that what people of Wales can hope for in terms of additional money? Because the Welsh Government itself has blamed a lack of funding from Westminster for the state of the Welsh NHS. Is it going to get better under you guys?
So what we have set out in the manifesto is based on the current growth forecast from the Conservative government. So obviously the economy has been stagnating and the economy is not growing. We would have a spending review. Rachel Reeves is going to have a budget. We will be setting out our plans, but those costings are indicative costings based on what we know in terms of current forecasts. And, you know, if you look at our policies that are in the manifesto, on NHS investment, so we will be cracking down on tax avoidance and removing the tax loopholes for the super wealthy, so for non-DOMs and private equity hedge fund. That money will go, we will have a Barnett consequential from that, will go straight into the NHS in Wales to bring down waiting lists. And by removing the tax advantage for private schools where they don't pay business rates or VAT, we will have money for Welsh Government to recruit more teachers in specialist subjects where we know they are needed. So there are specific issues in and policies set out in the manifesto. We've explained how we're going to pay for them, unlike the Conservatives and Plaid, who have a wish list of stuff with no mechanism or explanation as to how they will be paid for, and we know where that leads. You know, we saw that with Liz Truss.
Okay.
This is Liz Truss on steroids.
Liz Savile Roberts, not Liz Truss. Do you have just a wish list? Do you want to?
Well, if I could just start, I have a list, and I'll give you the list of how we would seek to fund things in a moment. But just today, the Institute of Fiscal Studies has criticised Labour's manifesto for saying that you've got no explanation about how you will fill that 18 billion black hole, which would in turn leave to 1 billion cut less money to Wales. So you're going to have to answer that, because in all honesty, what really bothers people out there is the fact that whenever they come into contact with public services, they see those public services falling them around them. Right, okay, I'll just go through the money how Plaid reckons we would pay for our initiatives. An increased windfall tax on energy companies will bring in 10.8 billion. Capital gains tax at the same rate as income tax, and that is going to people who are getting capital gains. This is not earned, 15 billion. If we were even to invest £1 billion in HMRC, that would bring back £12 billion to make sure that they actually went after taxes. Increase higher earners' national insurance contributions to make them to the same equivalent as people who are on standard rates. That will bring in 9.4 billion. 1% wealth tax above 10 million, 11.9 billion. That on private schools, 1.7 billion. And abolish loopholes for non-DOMs, 3.6 billion. That would be 64.4 billion pounds of looking in a creative, radical way at making sure that the broader shoulders carry the cost of having a civilized society in which we could get rid of the 2 children cap on benefits and actually start paying some of the 330,000 families of children in poverty in Wales an extra £20 a week.
Okay, David, I don't know how much. I think you might have dropped off for a little bit there.
I did.
Obviously,
sorry about that.
Call, not to sleep, I'm presuming.
No, I've got a really simple answer. I mean, I've also discovered, by the way, that if anyone rings me on the phone while I'm on this app, then I drop out. Anyway, the simple answer to the question is how much will Wales get? This answer is simple. Under the Barnett formula, £1.20 for every pound that's spent on public services in England. And that's why, really, Joe needs to be answering a few questions as to why, given that there's 20% more, why are our services not being delivered at the same level? Why is it that 20,000 people in Wales have been waiting more than 2 years for treatment when the comparable figure for England is a couple of hundred with 20 times the population? Why is it that the OECD say that we have the lowest educational standards in the United Kingdom? So that's the direct answer to the question. We have always made sure that Wales gets 20% more to spend on public services, and the Welsh Labour government have sometimes failed to put the money in, and when they have, they've failed to deliver on it. Okay. More widely, I think, if I may just finish, look at the commitment we've shown. I mean, Joe wants to try and suggest we don't care about Wales. We care deeply about Wales. I care deeply about Wales. That's why I raised the issues of what Welsh Labour are doing. But also, you look at the spending we've done, the 4 growth deals, which are joint UK Welsh government funded. We've had 3 rounds of levelling up funds, which and that combined with shared prosperities replaced in full the money that is no longer coming in from the EU, which Wales voted to leave. We've had the 2 free ports. We've got 2 investment zones. And just to come back to something Joe said, we put £500 million towards the arc furnace in Port Talbot. But of course, that doesn't preclude us from, and there are discussions going on with other companies about what we can do to support them as well. So Joe gave the impression, I'm sure she didn't mean to, that she's putting £3 billion on the table for Tata, but that is not true. Unless Joe wants to correct me, it is not there for Tata. She's making a commitment towards industry in general, and we are also making that commitment with large sums of money for industry.
Okay, thank you. I'm just waiting for my screen to come back. So I'm going to finish with a question on devolution. So every other UK nation has control over their police, but Wales doesn't. Is that right? We'll go back to David on that.
Well, I'd like to see the Welsh government, the Welsh Labour government, delivering on the public services which it is responsible for. I don't think there can be any argument for giving more powers to the Senedd at the moment. They have full control over the health service, full control over education, a large amount of control over transport and local government funding, well, full control over local government funding and much else. The rivers, for example, is one. And yet we see the Welsh Labour parliamentary candidates going around with leaflets saying, we're going to fix the health service if you vote Labour. They're not, because it's all dealt with by the Senedd. So, no, I don't think there's any argument for devolving further powers to the Senedd at the moment, including the police.
Liz Roberts, a lot of Wales public services are really struggling. Like you can't argue that education is improved necessarily under devolution. Should Wales have control over policing?
And of course, we were talking about funding previously. If you were to ask me about the need for greater scrutiny, for holding Welsh Labour to account, they have had control over health and education for a quarter of a century, and we see the condition in which we are. Now, to come back to policing and justice, of course, again, Welsh Labour Senedd members have asked for devolution, full devolution of justice and policing. Ironically, actually, Wales would get more funding for policing if it went through the Barnett formula as things stand, as it does through the policing formula. But there's a matter of principle here. We have control over housing, we have control over health. These are issues that if we want to actually make our communities more safe and reduce the level of imprisonment, which we have some of the highest level of imprisonment, as well as having more prison places that we actually need in Wales, once again, one of those few industries that the Tories have decided we should be allowed to increase. If we actually had full control over all the aspects of that, which has to go from policing through to the courts, looking at the rate of incarceration, looking at what happens in our prisons, looking at what happens with probation, then we might actually be able to make our communities safer. Now, to hear this just be dismissed by Labour, when it was even recommended, some aspects of this were recommended by Gordon Brown, is really quite extraordinary. And it seems to me, of course, Labour has been very happy to have devolved the powers to Wales back in 1999 that give us the means just to manage poverty, but never really to change our communities. That's why we, Plaid Cymru, are asking for extra powers, not for the sake of getting extra powers, but for actually to be able to build a better future for Wales with all the cards in our hands, with all the tools available.
Jo Stevens, do you want to come back on either of those 2 points?
Well, we've got a straightforward vision for policing and criminal justice, which is that when you report a crime, the police should come and investigate it wherever you live and whoever you are. And victims of crime should have faith and must be able to have faith that justice will be delivered and that people who commit crimes will be punished. And that hasn't been happening for the last 14 years. 9 out of 10 crimes go unsolved. Just over 1% of reported rapes result in a conviction, and rape victims, that tiny percentage, are waiting over 1,000 days to have their case heard at trial. Police numbers have been cut, trust has been undermined, people don't feel safe, and our justice system has ground to a halt. Now, I understand why, if you're looking at it through the lens of the last 14 years, you'd say this needs fixing, but I don't think the fix, we don't think the fix is to devolve and go through a whole process of tearing up the Home Office and the Ministry of Justice, when what we do need is what Labour is proposing, which is 13,000 new neighbourhood officers, a real plan to tackle violence against women and girls, specialist rape units in every force, and more prosecutors and more prison places where the money is there, but the Tories have just failed to build the places that we need it. So we committed to exploring with Welsh Government options for more locally delivered services and powers. Some of the things that Liz mentioned, powers over probation and youth justice services. And, I worked in the criminal justice system for many, many years, and I can see what has happened to it. And these problems need fixing. Tearing up structures is not the way to get that sorted out. Because
as you say, you said that we, as in Labour, think it's not about devolving, but both Jeremy Miles and Vaughan Gethin, when they were running to be leader, said that they wanted the devolution of policing. So when you say we, is that UK Labour? Has there been conversations with Welsh Labour? Why is...
We published our manifesto this week, which sets out exactly what I have just described on this call about what we will do around making our streets safer and cracking down on things like antisocial behaviour. And Welsh Labour, Vaughan Gethin as First Minister and his government have signed up to that.
Okay. We've come to an end. I'm very sorry to say. I thank you so much for giving up your time. We're going to go to each candidate now who's going to do a 1 minute closing statement. They can sum up all the times I ignored them putting their hand up to try and come in. So we'll go in the reverse order to last time. So we will start with Liz Savile-Roberts.
Okay, we've got 10 days to go before we get to the ballot box, and it's no secret that the Tories are done for. But what the last hour has shown us once again is that we can't expect any real change for Wales under Labour yet again. UK Labour ignores the wishes of its own representatives in Wales, and it flies in, parachutes candidates into places they've hardly ever put their feet down on the ground. We need to send them a message that Wales won't be taken for granted any longer. And as you've heard tonight, Plaid Cymru wants to do things differently. And I hope that I've shown we've got a positive vision for a fairer, more ambitious future for Wales, and we're not going to be quiet about that. We're not afraid to demand it. We want fair funding, and I know you do. We want more powers for Wales so we can invest in our economy, in our NHS, and in our public services. Then you know what to do. We need, in Wales, strong local representatives in all our communities that will hold both Labour and the Conservatives to account and demand fairness for all of us in Westminster, people who will always put Wales's best interest first. Vote Plaid Cymru on July the 4th. Diolch yn fawr.
Jo Stevens.
Thanks, Will, and thanks to everyone who submitted questions. At stake in this election is how we make Britain's economy stronger, rebuild our public services, expand opportunity, and exercise power and influence in the world. So it's about change. And Labour is the only party that can deliver change for Wales on the 4th of July. Both the Conservatives and Plaid have published manifestos full of unfunded promises, and we all know what that leads to, because we're all living with the legacy of Liz Truss's economic crash every single day. In contrast, we've set out our plans, how they will be paid for, and where the money will come from. I'm really ambitious for Wales. We have huge potential that for too long has been ignored and disrespected by Conservative governments in Westminster. Labour is the only party that can and will change that. So across Wales on the 4th of July, you have the opportunity to elect Labour MPs and with it, a Labour government. And I hope you will. Thanks.
Thanks, Jo. And finally, David T.C. Davis.
Well, far from being done for, I can assure everyone that we are out, and I'm out campaigning for every vote. And in fact, I think I've got the suntan arms to prove it. We're out campaigning to hold the Welsh Labour government to account for their failure to deliver decent public services over the last 25 years. But we're fighting a very positive campaign to explain what a Conservative government will continue to do. We're going to scrap national insurance for the self-employed and continue to drive it down for everyone else. We want to see more roads being built, like the Menai crossing. We want to scrap the 20-mile-an-hour blanket speed limit, which has been imposed without proper consultation with the public, and any move towards road tolling. We want to make sure that money is going into childcare and that the Welsh government are put under pressure to deliver that so that working parents can get back into the workplace. We want
to... I think we've lost David and his tanned arms. If he's going to be back in the next few seconds, we'll carry on. If not, I think we'll have to wrap it up there. But that's it for the WalesOnline General Election debate. I'd like to thank Jo Stevens, Liz Savile-Roberts and David T.C. Davis for joining us. I'd also like to thank everyone who put in questions. When we put this request in, we perhaps naively didn't expect the sheer amount of questions we would get. Hundreds of people engaged with this. And although we couldn't get to all the questions, in fact, is David back?
I am, but I know I've been cut off in my prime. I'm sorry. It was my fault. Somebody rang me again. I must never do that on a phone.
Maybe it's because you said on WalesOnline Facebook that if anyone calls you, it'll drop off. Maybe they heard.
Oh, maybe they did. Yeah.
So just finally, thank you so much to everyone who submitted. The questions we haven't got to, we are going to use to inform some of our reporting on the issues that we're going to cover in the coming days as well. So hopefully your questions won't be for naught. But thanks ever so much. My name's Will Hayward, Jochen Vauer, and thanks for joining us.
Well, job, Will.